She was dying, and the earth didn't even seem to notice. Curled beside the creek, her knees drawn to her chest like a child in a cradle, the girl looked less like a person and more like something the wind had nearly carried away. Dirt streaked her cheeks. Her lips were cracked open, blood caked at the corners. Eyes, far too large for her sunken face, blinked once, slowly, as if even that cost her something. Bear stopped dead in his tracks, heart slamming against his ribs like a warning. If you're a true Wild West soul, drop a big yes in the comments. Let's see who's still riding the trail with us. For one breathless moment, he thought she was already gone. Then her fingers moved, just a twitch, but it was enough. He dismounted and dropped to his knees, boots sinking into the wet clay as he crawled the last few steps to her. She looked up, not with fear, not with hope, just resignation. Like she'd already made peace with the fact that no one was coming. Her hand rose so slowly it nearly broke him and pointed to her mouth, then the creek, then back to him. He almost looked away. He knew what the townspeople would say. He knew the rumors, Comanche raids, stolen livestock, talk of blood and revenge thick in the saloons. Helping her meant choosing a side, and Bear had lived his life avoiding sides. But none of that mattered now, because this wasn't a warrior. This wasn't a threat. This was a child, and she was slipping away. He gathered her into his arms and felt nothing but bones wrapped in skin. She didn't cry, didn't speak, just let herself be held like a broken thing too tired to protest. By the time he reached the cabin, dusk had swallowed the sky. He laid her in his only chair and rushed to the stove, his hands shaking. He had some stew left, still warm, bread from the morning, water in a jug. When he placed the bowl in her lap, she didn't move at first. Then, with a jerk of instinct, she clawed at the food, shoving spoonfuls into her mouth with the desperate hunger of someone who had forgotten what it meant to be full. Bear crouched by the fire, watching her. Every bite was a miracle, every swallow a battle won. And it hit him then, hard and sharp. This girl hadn't just wandered off, she'd been left behind, lost, forgotten. And if he hadn't found her, if he'd come 5 minutes later, looked the other way, she'd have died with her face in the mud and no name on anyone's lips. He closed his eyes, gripped the edge of the hearth, and whispered to no one, "God forgive me if I'd just started a war." The girl ate like she hadn't seen food in weeks, spoon trembling in her hand as she shoveled the stew into her mouth. Some of it spilled down her chin, but she didn't stop. Bear didn't say a word. He just knelt by the fire, watching the way her hollow cheeks moved, the way her eyes never left the bowl. Hunger had erased everything else, fear, language, even shame. The fire cracked softly behind him. Outside, the sun had dipped below the ridge, and long shadows crept through the window like silent witnesses. She finished the stew and reached for the last hunk of bread with shaking fingers. Bear stood, walked to the table, poured her a tin cup of water. She drank greedily, then slumped back in the chair, her chest rising and falling like she'd just crossed a desert. He should have felt relief, but something itched at the back of his mind. A sense that this wasn't just a stray child who'd wandered too far from home. He crouched beside her, meaning only to check for wounds. Her skin was scraped, her arms thin and bruised. As he adjusted the coat he'd thrown over her shoulders, something caught the light. Just beneath the torn neckline of her dress, a glint, beads. Bear hesitated, then gently pulled the collar back. There it was. The necklace wasn't like anything he'd seen sold in trading posts or made by children. The beadwork was intricate, precise, delicate patterns in turquoise, white, and crimson. Even in the dim cabin light, it shimmered with meaning. And he'd seen it before. Not this necklace, no, but the design. His neighbor, old Pete Morrison, had described it just last week over a drink. "Beads like blood and sky," Pete had said, his voice low with awe. "Only the family of White Bull wears those, sacred, worn only by blood kin." White Bull, the most feared Comanche war chief in the territory. Bear's stomach turned to stone. He looked back at the girl. She'd fallen asleep in the chair, the bowl empty at her feet, her breath shallow and soft. But around her neck, the truth still hung. She wasn't just a starving child. She was the daughter of the one man who could raise 200 warriors and erase Bear's cabin and Bear himself from the earth before the next dawn. He stood slowly, heart pounding in his ears. The room felt smaller now, closer. The air tighter in his lungs, because helping a child was one thing, but sheltering the daughter of a war chief, that was something else entirely. And it was already too late to turn back. Bear had just finished covering the girl with his only blanket when the sound of hoofbeats thundered across the dirt road like distant gunfire. He moved to the window and peered through the curtain. 3 riders were tearing toward the cabin, dust boiling behind them. Even from here, he could tell they weren't out for a friendly visit. He stepped outside just as the horses skidded to a halt in front of the porch. "Bear, you damn fool! So," Cletus Hartwell shouted, not even waiting to dismount. His face was red, not just from the ride, but from fear. "What in God's name are you doing?" The other 2 men pulled up beside him, Deputy Sheriff Jake Morrison and Reverend Thomas, both pale and drawn. Morrison's hand hovered near the revolver on his hip, eyes scanning the tree line like he expected arrows to come flying any second. "There were smoke signals," Morrison said, "from the hills, not 5 miles from here." Bear said nothing. "Pete just rode in from the East Trail," Cletus cut in. "Said he saw the pattern himself. It was a search signal, a call for war." He leaned forward in the saddle. "And word just came in from town. Chief White Bull's daughter disappeared 3 nights ago during a hunting party. Last seen heading west before the storm hit." Bear's mouth went dry. Reverend Thomas spoke next, quiet but firm. "Jake here says you've had your chimney smoking since early afternoon. Stew, he figured, bread in the oven." He met Bear's eyes, and now we're wondering if that smoke meant something else. Bear hesitated. He could lie, say he didn't know anything, that he hadn't seen a thing. It would buy him time, maybe even safety. But the girl was inside, sleeping, breathing, alive because he'd given her food and warmth and shelter. "She's inside," Bear said. All 3 men froze. "She was alone, nearly dead. I found her down by the creek." "Jesus Christ," Cletus whispered. "She's half-starved," Bear continued. "Couldn't even walk. I couldn't just leave her." "You don't get it," Morrison snapped. "It doesn't matter what you meant. It only matters what they think. And if they think you took her, oh, they already do," the Reverend said. His voice was grave. "They're not looking for a lost child. They're looking for someone to punish." The 3 men sat in heavy silence. Then Morrison turned his horse. "I've got to ride back and warn the others, but I'll give you this much. Get her back to them. Fast." Bear looked toward the cabin, where a child's quiet breathing still filled the silence. And for the first time, he truly felt the weight of what he'd done. The first drumbeat rolled across the plains just after nightfall. Deep, slow, deliberate. Bear froze mid-step, the tin cup in his hand slipping from his fingers and clattering against the floor. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't wind. It was a sound carved out of centuries, and it was moving closer. He stood still, listening. Another beat, then another. Each one steady as a heartbeat, heavy as a funeral bell. Inside the cabin, the girl stirred. She sat up quickly, her blanket fallen away from her shoulders. Her eyes darted toward the door, wide and wild. She knew. Whatever those drums meant, they weren't just sound to her, they were language, warning, reckoning. She scrambled out of the chair on unsteady legs and grabbed Bear's hand with sudden, sharp strength. She pulled him toward the window, pointing out into the night with trembling fingers. Then she turned to face him, holding up both hands, opening and closing them again and again. Bear followed, counting silently. 10, 20, 30. She kept going. 40, 50, 60. Her hands moved faster, desperate. She reached 100 and didn't stop. Bear's mouth went dry. 200. 200 warriors. He staggered back from the window, nearly knocking over the stool behind him. "God help us," he whispered. The girl ran to the door and pointed again, more frantic now. Then she drew her thumb across her neck, not in threat, but in warning. He understood. If they thought he'd taken her, if they thought she was hurt, it wouldn't matter what he said. There'd be no questions, no trial, just justice. The old kind. The kind carved into the bones of the land. The drums kept beating. Bear moved through the cabin in silence, checking the rifle, then setting it aside. It would be useless. 100 rifles wouldn't stop what was coming. This wasn't a raid. This was something else, something older, colder, a war song. He turned to the girl. She stood near the door, shaken, her face pale beneath the dirt, still watching him, still pleading. "I don't know what you're trying to say," he told her, "but I hear you." He knelt down, leveled his voice. "You're not the only one scared, little one." Outside, the wind shifted, and with it came a sound that chilled Bear to the core. Horses, not one or two, dozens, maybe more. The war drums grew louder, their rhythm no longer patient, but hungry. He stepped to the door, hand on the latch. Whatever came next, he wouldn't face it hiding in the dark. The drums stopped all at once. The silence that followed was worse. He could hear his own heartbeat, sharp in his ears, and the girl's shallow breathing from the corner of the room. Bear moved to the window and pulled back the curtain. At first, the dark outside looked empty, still. Then the moon broke through the clouds, silver and cold, and the prairie began to shift. Shapes emerged. One by one, like ghosts rising from the earth, they came into view. Warriors on horseback, feathered and painted, forming a wide circle that stretched out past the edge of his field. They didn't move fast. They didn't shout. They didn't need to. Their silence was the loudest threat Bear had ever heard. He counted what he could see, but they kept appearing. From the north tree line, from the gully, from the hills behind the barn. All of them in formation, deliberate, deadly. His land was surrounded. The girl stepped up beside him, eyes locked on the riders. She didn't speak, but Bear could feel her fear pressing into him like a tide. She clutched his sleeve and pointed to the front of the circle. A lone rider emerged. He sat tall on a dark horse, wrapped in deerskin and war beads, his face painted with black streaks that looked like tears running from his eyes. His long black hair, streaked with silver, caught the moonlight like wire. Chief White Bull, there was no doubt. Even without his name spoken, Bear knew. The chief raised his hand. The line of riders shifted, tightening the circle. Not a sound among them, not a word. They were waiting. A voice rang out across the clearing, low, steady, laced with authority that didn't need volume to be heard. "White man," it said, in accented but perfect English, "you have taken what is mine." Bear opened the door and stepped onto the porch. His hands were raised, palms open. "I didn't take anything," he said. "She came to me, alone, starving. You feed her, shelter her, yet you did not bring her back." "I planned to, at first light." The chief's expression didn't change. "She is my blood," he said. "She carries the breath of our ancestors. You hold her under your roof as if she were a stray. That is not mercy. That is trespass." Bear glanced behind him. The girl stood in the doorway now, eyes on her father, lips trembling. Then, without warning, she ran past Bear and down the steps, straight toward the chief. The warriors tensed, but White Bull raised a hand. She reached him and collapsed into his arms. Bear watched as the chief knelt beside her, listening intently as she spoke in rapid Comanche, gesturing back toward the house. When he stood again, White Bull looked at Bear. And this time, there was fire in his eyes. The girl's words tumbled out fast and frantic, her small hands gesturing wildly as she clung to her father's robe. White Bull never looked away from her, not even once, but Bear saw the way his shoulders stiffened with each sentence. Whatever she was saying, it wasn't bringing comfort. Then the chief rose. He took a step toward Bear, slow and deliberate, his warrior shifting behind him like a wave waiting for the storm's signal. When White Bull finally spoke, his voice was a blade sheathed in calm. "She says you fed her," he said. "That you gave her a blanket, a chair, food." "I did," Bear replied. "She was half dead." The chief tilted his head. "You expect me to believe you helped her out of kindness? That a white man took in a Comanche child and asked nothing in return?" Bear met his eyes, and though his legs felt like sand beneath him, he didn't step back. "That's the truth." White Bull's jaw tensed. "You knew who she was. You saw the beads. You understood she was sacred, and yet you did not return her to us." "I planned to at first light," Bear said again, but it sounded thinner now, like a line drawn in dust. "Or," the chief said coldly, "you meant to use her, trade her, ransom her, protect yourself with her name while your people sharpen their knives behind closed doors." Bear felt every eye in the circle tighten on him, and the air was suddenly too thin to breathe. "I didn't take her," he said quietly. "I found her. She came to my water alone." He reached into the pocket of his coat, fingers brushing the fabric he hadn't let go of since that first night. Gently, he pulled it free and held it up. A strip of cloth, weather-stained, torn but unmistakable. Bright thread stitched in sacred Comanche pattern. "This," he said, "was caught on my fence. She'd torn her dress before I ever laid eyes on her. I kept it in case someone came looking. I wanted proof." White Bull took it, his fingers surprisingly gentle as he turned it over. Recognition flickered in his eyes. Pain, too. "She was lost," Bear said. "Not stolen." The chief looked at the girl. She nodded urgently, pointing to the cloth, then to Bear, then mimed eating, sleeping, resting. Her voice was a river now, fast and full of conviction. Her eyes glistened. White Bull listened, really listened. When he turned back to Bear, something in his expression had shifted, but only slightly. "My daughter believes you," he said. He stepped closer, close enough that Bear could smell the smoke in his hair. "But belief is not enough." And somewhere behind him, 150 warriors waited to see if mercy was still a thing that could be trusted. The wind shifted, and with it came voices. Not the sharp, disciplined calls of warriors awaiting orders, but a low, restless murmur, gravel underfoot, branches bending before they snap. Bear didn't speak. Neither did White Bull. They stood in the pale light between fire and shadow, the girl clutching her father's side, the torn cloth still in his hand. The silence felt thinner than it had before, less certain. And then the circle parted. A younger man stepped forward, his shoulders broad and his jaw tight with fury. His face was streaked with red paint, harsh and jagged, like something slashed on in anger. He held a lance in one hand, the tip already stained. Even in the flickering light, his eyes burned. Broken arrow. Bear knew the name from stories, half warnings told in town when tempers rose and cattle went missing. A war hound with no leash, loyal to White Bull by blood but not by temperament. He stopped just shy of the firelight and shouted something in Comanche, voice sharp as a knife through wood. The words hit the circle like sparks. Warriors murmured back. Some nodded. Others watched White Bull carefully. The chief didn't respond. He says, White Bull translated slowly, that words are smupua. He says that for every child our people lost, we buried them without answers. He says the white man's kindness is a mask for his knives. Bear held his ground. He's wrong. Broken Arrow didn't wait for translation. He stepped forward and slammed the butt of his lance into the dirt between them, sending a puff of dust into the air. Then he pointed it directly at Bear's chest. White Bull's voice lowered. He demands justice. Tonight. Blood for blood. The girl said something then, her voice small but fierce. She stepped between the two men, arms outstretched. But Broken Arrow didn't back down. His mouth moved fast, harsh syllables Bear couldn't follow. She says you helped her, White Bull said. He says that doesn't matter. More warriors were shifting now. Some moved behind Broken Arrow, others behind White Bull. Lines were forming in the dark, quiet and dangerous. Bear looked at the chief, at the girl, at the lance still pointed at his heart. He didn't reach for a weapon. He had none. He simply said, then ask him this. What would he have done if she'd come to his door, dying? The fire cracked between them. Broken Arrow said nothing, not yet. But Bear saw it in his eyes. The question had landed, and the answer, if there was one, might be the only thing that kept them all from burning. The circle was on the verge of breaking. Bear could feel it, like a storm winding itself up behind clenched fists and narrowed eyes. Broken Arrow stood tall, his lance still planted in the earth. Warriors behind him shifting restlessly, hungry for a verdict they could carry home to their families. One that sounded like vengeance. But then the girl stepped forward. She moved without hesitation, barefoot in the dirt, small shoulders drawn back as if something larger stood behind her, steadying her spine. The fire lit her face in pieces, ash and gold, and for the first time, Bear saw not fear, but purpose in her eyes. She spoke. It was not loud, but it was clear. The cadence of her voice rang through the circle like the first sound after snowfall, delicate but impossible to ignore. Comanche words filled the space between men trained their whole lives to fight. At first, no one moved, no one interrupted. Then one warrior leaned forward, brow furrowed. Another tilted his head. And then they were listening, all of them. Bear didn't understand her words, but he didn't need to. He could hear it in her tone, in the steady rise and fall of memory. She pointed to the creek, to the sky, then pressed her hand to her stomach. Her voice wavered only once, and Bear guessed she was describing the moment they met, the hunger, the cold, the near-death silence between breaths. She turned and pointed at him, and then she pointed to herself, not as property, not as a pawn, but as someone who had been saved. White Bull watched his daughter without blinking. Even Broken Arrow's hand dropped from his weapon. The girl kept going, painting pictures in air and syllable. She held her palm over her heart, then gestured to the men around her, then to the stars above their heads. There was no rage in her voice, only truth, a child's truth, the kind that doesn't try to bend the world, just name what it saw. Finally, she stopped. Silence fell like ash over the fire. White Bull cleared his throat, voice low but reverent. She says, you fed her, asked for nothing. She says she saw grief in your eyes, the kind only a father would understand. She says you did not see an enemy, only a child. Bear swallowed hard, but his voice didn't come. She says, if we punish kindness, the chief continued, we become what they already believe we are. Across the circle, the warriors sat still, some with eyes lowered, some watching the girl as if seeing her for the first time. And for one breathless moment, no one reached for a weapon. No one moved at all. They rode through the night, Bear in the center of the formation like a prisoner who hadn't been tied. The girl rode just ahead of him on White Bull's horse, her small frame upright, unshaken. No one spoke. Not a single warrior turned to look at him. The silence said enough. This was not an escort. This was a verdict in motion. The Comanche village came into view just before dawn, a half moon of firelight glowing in the low hills. The smell of smoke and cedar drifted through the air, mingled with something older, something ceremonial. Bear's heart pounded so hard it echoed in his ears. They led him into the center of the camp where a great fire cracked in a wide circle of stone. Around it sat 7 men, each one older than time itself, their faces lined with sun and grief and memory. The council. White Bull stepped forward first and spoke to them in Comanche, his voice formal, measured. He gestured toward Bear, then toward the girl, then back again. The elders listened without a word, but their eyes were sharp, studying Bear like they could see every scar beneath his skin. Then Broken Arrow stepped forward. His tone was different, faster, harder. He pointed at Bear, at the mountains, at the girl. His voice rose once, then dropped into silence. Then the girl stepped out from behind her father. Her voice, when it came, was soft but sure. She did not rush, did not flinch. Bear couldn't understand the words, but he could see the strength behind them, the steadiness in her hands, the pride in her spine. She pointed at the fire, at the sky, at Bear. She was telling the story again, her version, the only one that mattered now. The oldest elder, a man so bent by years he seemed carved from driftwood, leaned forward and asked her something in a voice that sounded like wind through dry grass. She answered without hesitation. White Bull turned to Bear. He asked her if she truly believes you would do it again, help a Comanche child, knowing the danger. She said yes, without pause. The elders conferred in hushed tones, voices rustling like leaves. Bear stood alone in the circle of firelight, the weight of 2 worlds pressing down on him. Finally, the eldest rose. He spoke slowly, and White Bull translated. The spirits tested us tonight, he said, not in battle, but in restraint, not in fury, but in mercy. And mercy was found. Bear let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. You may return to your land, and you will be protected. But, White Bull added, there is one condition. Bear nodded. Anything. If any of our people come to you in need, wounded, lost, starving, you must do as you did for her. I swear it, Bear said. The girl looked up at him then and smiled, and Bear realized for the first time he wasn't walking out of the fire alone. The fire had burned low, its glow now flickering faintly against the weathered faces of the elders. Smoke curled toward the stars in thin ribbons, as if the flames themselves were whispering prayers to the night. Bear stood motionless, dust clinging to his boots, sweat cooling on the back of his neck. The girl had returned to her father's side, but her eyes never left Bear. White Bull stepped forward, his voice low but steady. The council has spoken. You are not our enemy tonight. Bear's shoulders sagged in quiet relief, but he didn't speak, not yet. You gave our child warmth when the land turned cold. You fed her when no one came. And when you knew who she was, who we were, you did not run. I just did what any man should have done, Bear said softly. White Bull tilted his head, a flicker of something like amusement in his eyes. No, many would have done otherwise. Most already have. He stepped closer, holding something small in his hand. Bear recognized it, a carved token etched with sacred symbols. He'd heard of these. Not gifts, not rewards, promises. "You will return to your land," White Bull continued, "under our protection. No Comanche will raise a hand against you, but this is the condition." He placed the token in Bear's palm. "If another comes to you, wounded, hungry, afraid, you will do the same, without question, without hesitation." Bear looked at the carved edges of the token, felt its weight, not heavy but meaningful. "I give you my word," he said. The girl stepped forward then, her voice barely above a whisper. "You saved me," she said, broken English wrapped in courage. "Now I save you." Bear swallowed hard, the lump in his throat refusing to move. The elders began to rise one by one, slow and solemn, their approval not spoken, but seen in the nods they offered him as they turned away. In another life, another version of the story, this night would have ended in fire, in blood. But here he was, alive beneath the same stars that once watched men die for less. As dawn bled over the hills, casting a pale glow across the camp, Bear mounted a borrowed horse and turned toward home. But he did not ride alone. 2 warriors rode beside him, not guards, not captors, but an escort of honor. And behind him, just beyond the smoke, the girl stood tall, watching until the rising light made it too hard to see. Bear pressed the token to his chest. He hadn't asked for peace, but it had found him anyway. The years passed, but Bear's ranch never looked the same again. Word spread, as it always does on the wind, quiet at first, like a rumor too strange to believe, then louder, truer, that a Comanche child had been taken in by a settler and lived. That Chief White Bull had ridden out with war in his heart and returned with something else, not a scalp, not a treaty, but a promise. Some called Bear crazy, others called him brave. He didn't care either way. He just kept working the land, fixing the fences, turning the soil, keeping the chair by the hearth clean, just in case. And each year, on the same spring morning when the snow finally gave up and the first green dared to push through the frost, she came back. Not a little girl anymore. She rode up on a painted horse now, long black braid trailing down her back, her voice calm, her words stronger than ever. She spoke English like it had always belonged to her, and Comanche like the wind owed her its breath. A translator, they called her, a peacekeeper. But to Bear, she was just the girl with the eyes too big for her face, who once pointed at her mouth and saved his life in the same breath he'd saved hers. They never spoke much about that night. They didn't have to. She'd bring a small pouch of ground corn, and Bear would hand her a plate. They'd eat in silence sometimes, or talk about the herd, the dry summer, the stubborn rooster that wouldn't stay off the porch. The land healed in those silences. So did the past. Settlers began to notice. One by one, they'd ride out to Bear's place not with rifles, but with questions. Some brought offerings. Some brought fears. But they left different than they came. The Comanche did too. Now and then, a rider would show up at Bear's fence line, not with a challenge, but with a request. A wounded boy, a lost sister, a sick mother. Bear always said yes, not because of obligation, because of what the old chief had taught him. Mercy given once must be given again, or it turns into something else entirely. By the time Bear's beard had turned silver and his boots wore through at the toes, the ranch had no more enemies, just stories. And one of them came back every year to sit by the fire and remind him of the night kindness stood its ground and didn't flinch. She'd smile and say, "You saved me." And he'd say, "No, you walked into my life and changed it." He died at 73, peaceful, quiet, blanket pulled to his chest, and when they buried him, they did so with the token Chief White Bull had given him still clutched in his hand. They buried a cowboy, but they remembered a bridge.